Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on when and where you are watching this. Viva Fry, former Montreal litigator turned current Florida rumbler, with another sit-down interview with someone who you may or may not yet know from the interwebs, a Canadian. I don't want to misdescribe the person, ex-infantry or ex-military whistleblower when it comes to certain things COVID, Dawn Dussault. And if you don't know who she is, you're going to know who she is after this interview. And I'm going to bring Dawn in right now. Dawn, how goes the battle?
It's going good. How are you?
Very good, very good. So you'll have to explain to the world, 30,000-foot overview, who you are before we get into the details, because we started talking before we went recording, and you started going into things, and I said, no, we got to save this for when we actually start recording. Who are you, for those who may not know?
So hello, everyone, and Viva Fry. I'd like to just start by saying that you are so supported in the community that I operate in, and people adore you. And so we really think that what you're doing is so incredibly important. And it's just a shame that we understand why you left, but it's a shame that you left Canada. And well, so I'll start saying that.
I'll just intervene and say, like, thank you, because I've been taking a lot of shit lately these days, especially this is post-election, for being rightly critical of Pierre Poilievre. And I appreciate that people resent the fact that I left Canada temporarily, maybe permanently, we'll see. But seeing what's going on in Canada, I'm not really much of a person who believes in financing your own tyranny and paying 50% of whatever I make so that I can get brutalized by my government. We all have our line in the sand. Sorry. Okay. So Dawn, what is your milieu, your niche?
My niche. I can get into the family background if you wanted to get into that, or I can start with my career. It's up to you.
No, let's start. Born and raised, where are you from in Canada?
Okay, so I was born in Saint Eustache, Quebec, which is kind of a city, and I lived there for a few years, and my parents separated during that time. It was a hard period, but my mother did remarry shortly after. So I had a stepfather who inherited 3 children and a single mother. And he was a trucker. And anyways, long story longer, I guess. But we moved to the Gaspésie, which is where he was from, and his family. And there were hardships there as well. But it was a collective struggle. And it was based on, I would say, Irish and French Catholic religion, I guess, would be the foundations that we kind of lived through. And I lived in a cabin in the woods without running water, electricity at times. We hunted, we fished. Like, even when I was 4 years old, I had a lot of experiences there. And I did public speaking even when I was in grade 4. I did a public speech on the language dispute between French and English-speaking people in Quebec. And then I went on from there. I was in grade 4. And so I always had this passion for learning and having facts presented to me, because I had strong role models as well.
No, Saint Eustache, for those who don't know, it's just outside of Montreal, but Gaspésie, for those who don't know, you drive 18 hours to the east. You might be at what's called the Roche Percée, which is the pierced rock. It's sort of like a hole in a rock. Yeah, they don't let people go there anymore. They used to be able to go down at low tide, but apparently it's crumbling.
That's right.
What city in the Gaspésie? Because I do know a few. I mean, and that's also where Mont-Jacques-Cartier is, which I think is the highest peak in Quebec. Beautiful, beautiful hiking.
Incredible. I'm actually hiking that on the 15th. I shouldn't say the date, but I'm actually doing it within the next week. I'm going to be hiking Mont-Jacques-Cartier with my partner and my Jeep. We're going to pop up the tent. And anyways, and so we're going to go back, because I actually have a cabin in the Gaspésie where I used to live. I have a cabin, a hunting cabin on a few acres.
Is it on the salmon spawning rivers?
It is. It's close.
I don't want to Gaspésie. No, for those who don't know, it's a beautiful place. There's estuaries and there's good hiking, and you get to the Roche Percée and then you come down the south side. Carleton is the only city I remember on the south side, and then you hit New Brunswick and the Maritimes. But so how many years of your life did you spend in the Gaspésie?
I would say in total it would be about 10 years, I would say. But during that time, because my family from my mother's side, they were in Laval West. And so during the summers and during the holidays, we would go there. And I had a lot of influence there as well. With I would do volunteer. Well, not with volunteer. I was working with my grandmother at the nursing home, because that's where she worked. So a lot of interesting people there I met, and so I was back and forth. And then I moved out when I was 16. I was still going to school and working, and then I was able to complete my advanced mathematics, like you have to do the 432, like the mathematics, physics, calculus, and stuff like that. And then I got a scholarship to CMR, RMC. I could talk a lot about my background.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So, you know, high school is interesting, but I mean, just the fact that so there's 4 siblings growing up in a broken but reunited home of sorts with the stepfather. Good relationship with your stepfather?
I would say that I have a more, I would say, enlightened worldview and perspective than I did at the time as to like how my life was in comparison to people from other countries. Like I've been all over the world, whether it be in a work capacity or for genuine interest in advanced infrastructure, things like that. But you see just kind of a different side of humanity, and you see suffering, and then you compare that to what you grew up in, and it's when it's not comparable, and you understand that if people knew better or had better, they would do better. I don't know if I said that right, but if you had better and you knew better, you would do better.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, there were struggles, but again, we got through it, and it built a lot of strength and resiliency. And in that, I also had a strong community, because even there, like I inherited aunts and uncles and cousins, and it was a very strong, close-knit community even there. So there was still a lot of love, and I definitely and strong role models. I have to say that, and that really influenced, I guess, my life, I would say.
Where do you go to high school? Where do you go to university? And how do you end up in the military?
So I finished my high school. I went to multiple different schools, so that in itself was a little complicated. But I went to Lake of Two Mountains High School. That's where I finished. And that's actually where my sister is a teacher now. I'm so proud. But anyways, and she was a stay-at-home mom for many years. That was very important. She has 3 kids, and she's been with the same man for over 26 years now. And yeah, so anyways. And so I finished high school at LTM. And then I went to CMR, and then from there, that's the Collège Militaire Royal, which is in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, which is like an hour, I would say, like east of Montreal.
Okay.
You do a year there, which is basically like 2 years of stage up in one. And I did well there, and then at RMC as well, I went there. So the Royal Military College, and when I was there, I took every opportunity I could to enhance my skill sets and challenge myself. And so there's a lot of things that I did there as well that were it was just incredible. And I met so many incredible people when I was there as well.
How old are you when you do the RMC?
It would have been the ages of 19 to like 23, 24 is when I was going through CMR and then RMC afterwards. Different provinces.
And then you deploy to see, do you see combat? Do you go overseas?
I do. And so I did. And so even so even with no, I actually won't get into that stuff. And so I during my RMC periods, I think this is important as well. I already, when we enroll, it's different than the American military, but I already decided what I wanted to be. So I was in the infantry. And so when I enrolled from 2001 to 2016 is when I served, but I already wanted to be infantry because I did a lot of research in Montreal at the recruitment center. And I was like, well, this basically is like my lifestyle anyways, to so many different degrees. And so we go through phase training in the summer. So during the school semesters, there's 4 pillars that you have to try to achieve and strive for, which is bilingualism. There's a military component, there's a physical fitness component, and then there's obviously academics. And so we were doing that during the year, and I had military positions that were very busy, especially for my year. And then in the summers, I was doing phase training, and for me, it was infantry, and there's not a lot of females in the infantry, especially as officers. And so that in itself was quite challenging, but I met a lot of incredible people. And then from there, I got posted to an infantry regiment, and I was platoon commander right away. I went from phase training for months, doing the gentleman's course is what they call it, and then I went right to Wainwright, which is a huge training base, and I was safety staff. And then within 3 days of getting there, I had a warrant, and we were doing live fire air mobile attacks on a built up area with tunneling systems and stuff like that. So it was just. And so there was a lot of workup training and stuff like that I did before I deployed. And I was part of the battle group. So it was a combat tour. And we did lose great people that I even carried the medal and the beret of just true heroes. And so, I would say even after that, actually, even before that, we were already losing people in the war in Afghanistan, and Americans and Canadians, because I did an exchange at West Point in my 4th year. And I met a lot of incredible people there as well. And yeah, so so it wasn't easy. And I was also the battle group embarkation officer. So I was also managing the relief in place is what we call it, but for people all over Canada that were deploying to Afghanistan. And then also when they got there from the staging area, whatever you want to call it, Kandahar airfield. Also, the deployment of them into the areas of operation that the different organizations would be operating in throughout that tour. And that in and itself was incredibly busy.
Well,
anyways, going on all these tangents. But then I went to the special forces. I was asked to go, and I was able to make it. And I was the training squadron's second in command, and incredibly busy. But again, I met the best of the best people. And
when you say incredibly busy, I mean, that means you're talking action in terms of what you're experiencing overseas.
I would say during the period that I was in, it was a war fighting period. It was between the years of 2001 to 2016. We got out of combat missions, that's technically on the record, on the record in 2014. And so at that point, like prior to that, it was very much, we have such a small army, especially in comparison to the Americans. And so we were just still doing like the same deployments and rotations. And so, but it was just with significantly less people. And even managing really large areas of operation when we were there in very dangerous areas. But and so even when we weren't fighting, going overseas, there were multiple people that I knew even before I went into my regiment. There were already seasoned war fighters and heroes. I have so many incredible stories, and so that's so during that time it was either you were training to fight, you were on some kind of like QRF or like I don't know what you would call it, QRF, or you were
what's a QRF?
Oh, it's a quick reaction force. And so that's kind of what we call it, as a broad term for like just assistance in like domestic operations, assisting with wildfires or flooding, things like that.
So you're either training for combat, assisting in those types of disaster relief, or you're in Afghanistan overseas in either an active combat or organizing from the base. Yes, and traveling also not just in a combat capacity either. There's a lot of travel when it comes to training or being part of committees or panels or liaison officers, or there's so many different other roles you can have, advisory roles that are separate from the troops on the ground that are doing the combat. What was your position what was your position in this throughout? And then, I mean, I guess what access to. I have other questions that I'll ask afterwards, but what's your formal position while you're doing all of this, and what level access do you have in terms of information in this time?
I'm still current, and it's not expired for another 7 years, but I have top secret government clearance, and so anything that I've shared, this is all open source or unclassified, declassified information, but I still have that. So I held multiple different positions within the military. I was quite busy. And I was all over Canada with this, and then also working a lot with the Americans, obviously, in the Five Eyes community throughout. And so, and also working a lot with other government agencies. And so even when I was I would say we were working closely with the higher levels of the CBSA, CSIS, CSEC, obviously the RCMP and their ERT teams and DART. And so many levels of government, and because again we had the most incredible people that were within these organizations, and they were literally the experts.
But how do you keep your top security clearance if you're now whistleblowing about certain things that you came across in that time, or subsequent, I guess?
It's a good question. I am walking a bit of a gray area, but for anything that I've signed non-disclosures for, I've never shared information about, and I never will. And so there's absolutely information that I've withheld intentionally because it would be a breach of those non-disclosures, and which is what Pierre's talking about when he was talking about that during the elections. I completely understood what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. And so even if I risk having my top secret clearance revoked from me from what I shared, again, it's open source. It's accessible to people, and so it shouldn't get me in any trouble. And I'm trying to help by sharing the truth. And so, but anyways,
and the stuff, the information for which you have signed NDAs, that pertains to pre-COVID. I imagine that's sort of like war in Afghanistan level stuff, or does that also pertain to stuff since?
No, because after I got out, I was working with private security companies. I was working with former special forces. I was working executive protection. So I've even done, even in 2022, for example, I did executive protection for Justin Trudeau, and I've done executive protection for the heads of the Bank of Canada. I was doing it to actually backfill and augment for a friend that's former special forces and stuff like that was working there. And so he wanted to go to Florida for a bit because he had pain, and it's really hard in for Canadian winters. For like it just anyways, it gets more inflamed. I guess it gets more inflamed. So anyways, I was just covering, but so I've done executive protection for multiple of the what we would consider like the highest levels of government, and so I can offer that perspective because like I also knew more. I was more aware of Mark Carney because I didn't work for him. Obviously, I came in after him, but I knew about him because of the people that I was working with. And so even in that in itself was a, I guess, interesting perspective.
Well, we're definitely going to get into that. I just wanted, before I forget and before we move on from Afghanistan, you hear stories about how American troops were actually protecting poppy fields in Afghanistan, and that the war basically became a question of Americans protecting the drug trade, the opiate trade of Afghanistan. When you were there, I mean, is that the similar experience that you had? And I mean, I guess the broader question is, was that going on? Was that an element of what Western involvement was doing out in Afghanistan? And how do you feel in retrospect about your involvement on a personal level and the West's involvement at a broad level?
These are all great questions, and in it, I could go so deep on all of these topics. But I would say that when I was there, when I was operating within, I was all over the area of operation because I was a convoy operations officer. You'd classify me as, and I had a lot of assets that were all over the areas that we were working in. And so I've also done humanitarian aid in that position. And so when we were there, what I was seeing was there were people that were getting, there was absolutely crimes against humanity, a lot of it by Taliban and other insurgents that I know now were funded by government. It is what it is. And there were accounts of people that have been interviewed and talked to regarding the poppy fields and other fields and crops that were grown prior to that. But anyways, that's another layer. Where was I going with this? So my exposure was, we were trying to be helpful. So we were really trying to immerse ourselves with like close to like locals that were like very, very spread out, and protect them because their Sharia law was being practiced. It still is, but it was being very it was very extreme. And so if you were homosexual, that was death for and women weren't allowed to go to school, have an education, work. There was just so many restrictions. And so anyways, this is all over the place, but I was getting exposure to that and IEDs with mass cast situations where they were targeting, again, their own local populations because they weren't what they were believing were practicing Sharia law to the extent that they should have been. Anyways, it's so layered. And so like just a lot of different perspectives that I got over there that I learned. And when I look back now, and this is another reason why like I got into the stuff that I got into after the military is I have a different perspective on what happened with 9/11 and who was involved. And I go into great detail on that on video, so I won't talk about that. But I do.
No, well, you can't leave. We won't go into the great detail, and I will unjudgingly listen. But you can't dangle that and not satisfy the audience. What is your belief of the true narrative, not the official narrative?
I would say that there was government involvement, and I would say that there were also people that I would call super nationalists, the people that go to the Bilderberg meetings annually. That there was involvement there. So people like Larry Silverstein, I don't really want to name people, but he profited a lot from this, and he absolutely knew that there was controlled demolitions that were in these buildings, and Building 7 also controlled demolitions. I could talk about the high heat and the melting of the steel. It was impossible given the jet fuel heat signature. There's just so much to unpack with that. These were absolutely controlled demolitions. And then you've got Marvin Bush. Oh, sorry. Controlled
demolitions pre-existing within the buildings or set up for the event?
My theory is that it was pre-existing. Possibly not Building 7. I'm not like but that again in itself, these were controlled demolitions, free fall, close to free fall, I will say, falling of the buildings, the structures themselves. And so Marvin Bush, there was possibly security organizations that were also working within these towers for months, even prior to. And then when you look back, again, it goes into JFK and the assassination and who was involved in that. And it just seems like there's repeat offenders, I would say, respectfully, that have been involved in staging and planning events, creating it as a false flag, blaming other people, getting us involved in proxy wars that benefit them and their shareholders and the oil industries and things like that, and not helping anyone else, right? And just causing a lot of suffering needlessly, unfortunately.
I mean, and we don't need to get into the. I've mentioned Operation Northwoods many times on the channel, but it's
I
like
have too.
9/11. If you were to, if you believe in that, and it's not a crazy thought by any means, it's like the iteration or Operation Northwoods 2.0. Except you fill in the buildings and change the names of the countries, and that's what you could have
100%.
there. Okay, so you serve in Afghanistan, in and out for about 15 years. You get immense experience doing that. What do you do after you come back to Canada? Technically, the war's over, although people have still been there for another decade. What do you do in Canada in terms of military, in terms of intelligence, in terms of security? I got to get to the Justin Trudeau and hanging around him. How do you even get there?
It was more of a backfill. But so in 2016 is when I released. I immediately got back into, well, I was working because it's a very small community, and people that were former special forces that had private security companies or other companies like Reticle, for example, they reached out, and so I wanted to help, and it was flattering because even former sergeant majors of mine were reaching out, and so I'm like, oh, I guess I was good enough for you to want to work with again, and so all great people, and so I was doing that work, and so when I was working with these private security companies, I was a use of force instructor, and so I got certified by like incredible use of force instructors, but anyways. And so, for example, these security professionals at the LCBOs in Ontario,
Those are the liquor stores of Ontario.
Yeah. So all the security. Oh, sorry. Pardon me.
No, I'm just trying to think. I think the acronym is Liquor something Board of Ontario.
Liquor Commission.
Yeah, Liquor Commission Board. Something
Control Board. Control Board. I don't know. I'm not really.
It's for those who are listening. It's the Liquor Stores of Ontario. Okay.
Yeah. Clearly not a big drinker. So anyways, where was I going? Oh yeah. So I was training the security professionals that were working in all the LCBOs within Ontario, including doing work with the head of security in Toronto, downtown Toronto. Great people. And so I was doing that. And then I was also doing, I would say, like, it would be lethal, non-lethal. And so I was doing advanced firearms instruction and teaching the authority to carry courses to other use of force, other security professionals above and beyond the use of force qualifications. And because they had to be armed for the vehicles they were operating within and the cargo that they were transporting. And so I was doing that. And then I was also concurrently doing, I was the course coordinator for the Standing Rapid Deployment Team courses. So these are, and this was involved Global Affairs Canada, DART, like the highest levels of government for people that respond to natural and man-made disasters internationally and at home. And so this is where in 2016, I was already looking a lot at events that happened in the past in order to find out what accurately happened, because I was incorporating that in my training and in my scenarios, like my practical iterations or portions of the course packages that I was teaching. And so even with that course, that was a very large package that involved, for example, Connaught Base. So bases, military bases, it involved hospitals, even the Queensway, whatever you want to call it Carleton Hospital. And so I had access because I knew the head of security there as well. And so it's also building contacts with people throughout my career also has assisted me getting access to areas not a lot of people get access to. So I had access to prisons, for example, in Canada as well. So some scenarios involved that. Anyways, it was a big piece that involved a lot of infrastructure, and then COVID hit. But anyways, beyond that, so I was doing that. Concurrently, I was also I was doing executive protection for like I was saying, the governor and the SDG for the Banks of Canada, and I did that for a bit. And I did executive protection during a high threat period. So there were it was known in my community that there were people getting targeted, former leaders of different countries that were possibly on like a more right wing side or ideology or whatever you want to call it, party, that were getting targeted. And so like even like the day prior to me doing that job, there was already like the former PM of Japan was assassinated. And so like that again triggered obviously more alerts. And anyway, and so I've done that. And I was working with
executive protection is security.
It is. It's more higher level. So it's not just like there's a difference between like close protection, executive protection, and bodyguard work. It just depends on your skill sets and qualifications. And so
are you doing this with a company, or are they hiring you sort of like an expert independent contractor to sort of aid and assist with their team?
So both. First, it was they were. I hired for them for different contracts, and then I incorporated in 2018, and then I started my own company, and then I was doing contract work in that capacity, and it was quite busy, and so I was also acting as a role player because of my unique skill sets for the Five Eyes community and at other higher levels of government. I've done advanced firearms instruction for even wildlife preservation officers during this time, and other law enforcement and military. And so I was very busy in the industry, and then 2020 hit, and then again a lot of my contracts were delayed at first, and then obviously expired. And because of what I've been sharing, I'm sure that has, not helped get me access back to the contracts in the last 2 years, especially. But
you've met Justin Trudeau in person.
He's been in the area, like close to me. So, like, for example, I can't get into too many details, but like I was right beside him essentially, and the head of the Toronto Raptors at the time, as well, and and others as well. But anyways, and so so I was within like the corridors of like the areas that he was operating in and does his work and things like that. And I've also had access to these areas already, though, because when I was the executive protection for the Bank of Canada, I was also in these areas. I had access to multiple different areas that most people don't have access to. And so I was already familiar. Anyways, and so I'm going on all these tangents. But
well, let me ask you, it's going to be a bizarre question. I'm going to ask it anyhow because my audience probably knows that I'm going to ask it. Does Justin Trudeau smell bad, or does he smell good?
I didn't get that. I was close, but I wasn't paying attention.
I have my theory. I dislike him so much. I have a feeling he would offend my olfactory senses, even if he wore Fahrenheit cologne, because it would mix with the pheromones on his body and it would make me angry. And I'm going to ask another one. This is going to be another one that if I don't ask it, you can decline to answer. I presume, is there any truth to the rumor of the NDA that he signed with the student back in the day, 1999, give or take, when he was asked to leave the school that he was teaching at?
That's a good question. I don't have enough tangible evidence to support that. There's a lot of conjecture regarding, like, a lot of rumors regarding Trudeau, and I think it's intentional to distract people from the terrible job he's been doing in government.
Interesting. A potential double fakey intelligence operation to get people distracted by alleged sexual improprieties 2 decades ago. I don't think anyone was distracted about the terrible job he did. I don't have very many friends in intelligence, but I do have friends. And this was a while back, someone intimately involved with, and said, everybody knows it's true, but nobody has that NDA, or at least is willingly disclosing it. Okay, now, and then one last thing. You said, Canadian government or American government funding the terrorists, or funding, it is what it is in Afghanistan. That is, what does that mean? And is it still going on?
Well, I mean, I was going to say, it's not even just Afghanistan. So it's either directly or indirectly funding terrorist groups or people that hate us, and there's always a concern with radicalization, but I'm going on all these tangents. These drug wars have been fueled and propagated by people within the American government, unfortunately, and with Canadian involvement as well. And these drug wars have been propagated all over the world. And it's what funds the wars, what gets these super nationalists, these elitists at the top. It gets them more money, more wealth, more power, prestige, whatever you want to call it. And it's part of the psyops, or whatever you want to call it. It's part of the script, the narrative that they're steering in order to benefit from.
All right, so 2020 comes around. I'm very curious as to how you got the executive protection of Trudeau in 2022. But
I know. The thing is, people know that, like, I care about Canada, and so, like, any of this. Anyway, I won't get into that stuff. Sorry. It's Canada first for me.
The big part of your, you put it in quotes, whistleblowing, or the information you've been disclosing, pertains to the COVID, the origins, the outbreak, and I don't know, the Canada's involvement in it potentially. Everyone who's watching on my channel has been around for a while, knows, we know of the 2 Chinese scientists who were working closely with that lab in Wuhan, who disappeared into China, You know, at the time whereabouts, we know that Canada had been training Chinese soldiers for wintertime combat on Canadian soil. We know that Trudeau donated, you know, I was going to say a ton of PPE, but it was literally 16 tons of PPE, personal protective equipment, to China in February of, you know, right before COVID was coming. I guess flesh out the degree of Chinese infiltration in Canadian politics and what on earth was going on with those Chinese scientists working with China, bringing over trade secrets or whatever, and then disappearing into the communist jungle that is the Chinese Communist Party.
Big questions. So I would say that around 2019, well, it was in 2019, because of the industry I was in and the people that I was communicating with, there was already talk about a potential lab leak in Wuhan. And so there were photos that were provided of people. Anyways, there was some interesting, compelling data that was provided that would compel further investigation. And there was a lot of propaganda that was being pushed already. And then there was concerns that during the Wuhan Games in China, so there was these CISM games is what they call it, but these were military games. And this, I was CISM running when I was in the military for a period as well. So I was interested in this. And so in October of 2019, there was the Wuhan Games in China, obviously, that involved representatives from the military from all countries. And there were people that were possibly, that have come out and said this, but and other people are corroborating this, but they've said that they were sick and that possibly there were aircrafts that were grounded because of sickness, because of concerns, even during that time. And then there was Event 201 that was being run out of Johns University during that time. And there was Bill and Melinda Gates involvement with that as well. And so I could go into so many rabbit holes, but maybe I should back this up a little bit, because even in 2018, I was part of the Methylquin mass tort. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it was a mass tort because the Canadian Armed Forces members were attempting to change policies, essentially, because we were essentially required to take these anti-malarial drugs, even though they were banned in other countries prior to. So we were required to take it for operations, despite the fact there were really incredibly bad side effects. And so I wasn't coming at this from, a lens where I wasn't already realizing that there was issues with therapeutics and vaccinations and things like that. I was already aware that this was happening. And so that gave me a bit of a background as well. And even Jeremy McKenzie, who's part of Diagolon, he was part of the Methylquin mass tort. So I'm sure he became more suspicious of the rollouts and stuff like that. So I wasn't surprised that he actually got more viral. And so we were already tracking things. And then Li Wenliang from out of China, he was a scientist. He started sharing information in December, talking about a possible virus and a lab leak. And so by that time, I was fully invested, and he actually ended up dying shortly after he started exposing this. And there was a lot of backlash. And so
how did he die? He
allegedly died of COVID, and when he was 35 years old. But he's been exonerated, by the way, since then. And he's actually labeled on like the NIH, like official scientific dissertations, as being a martyr. And so
the mefloquine, MEFLOQUINE mass tort was, I mean, it's relatively new to me, but that was, they test on the military, but I presume, did you suffer direct side effects from the mefloquine treatment, or was it prospective because it takes years, if not decades, to determine if you've been injured by this anti-malarial drug?
So when I was going through, it was required. Like we even had to put permethrin on our uniforms and stuff like that. But I would say that we're like the unit that I was operating in, like the Patricias, like they're sometimes seen as the cowboys of the Canadian military. But things had to make sense. And so I would say that our chain of command at the time were, I would say, providing it, like making it available for people. And a lot of people did end up taking it because they did think that it would help against getting, like extreme malaria symptoms while they were serving. That would not be fun. But there were adverse reactions enough where even myself, I was getting like, I had like these sweats, I was getting night terrors and stuff like that. So all I did was I just stopped taking it. And so if people were talking to me about it and stuff like that, I'm like, just don't freaking take it. And maybe I shouldn't say that openly, right? But this is not something that even my boss or my chain of command were enforcing or mandating at that time. But but yeah, but it's still something that needed to be changed in policy, right? Because there were a lot of people that were pushing this and enforcing this in you know what I mean, where there wasn't a choice, there wasn't informed consent.
That's wild. Okay, and Jeremy also had his experience with mefloquine.
He was part of the mass tort, or at least he was involved in that community. And so I to be honest with you, I don't know his experiences with it. Like, I don't know if he's even talked about it on his podcast or anything like that, but.
Okay, so interesting. So you've had your experience. You're starting to have your skepticism about the government and its MO. Along comes COVID. These are things that I have heard as well, and I think your name comes up a lot in terms of confirming or being the whistleblower or divulger as relates to the allegations of grounding of planes. And the allegation was that there was a plane full of Canadian military that came back from Wuhan. They were so sick they grounded the plane and basically quarantined the plane. Are you able to explain any details about that, or the time frame, the dates, and the accuracy of those rumorings?
So there's his name is Ethos and Eris. That's how he go. That's where he goes. That's his handle online. I don't want to give his name. And so he has a Discord page, which I highly recommend if you're in government in Canada, take a look at that, because he has broken down in very organized file folders, whatever you want to call that, a breakdown of like various different access to information requests that he has submitted from the government, essentially is what you'd call it. You have the Freedom of Information Acts or whatever in the US. In Canada, it's access to information requests. And he has a lot of them. So we have been consistently asking for details and information regarding October, the possible groundings of these aircrafts because of sickness, because there's rumblings within the military. It's a small military that people were sick and they didn't know what it was. There was no, they didn't know it was possibly COVID at the time or anything like that. And so our access to information requests, they keep on not giving us information or delaying giving us information in these regards. So it's impossible to confirm it, despite the fact that there are people that have come out and said that they were sick.
Okay, and sick at that. Well, sick actually a couple months before anybody knew anything.
Yes,
after having had training sessions in Wuhan, China.
Well, it was military games, so they were competing in sports.
And in Wuhan, I mean, this is in the place where the Institute of Virology is.
Yes.
Okay.
A month after, there was a possible lab leak that people like Li Wenliang were talking about within it. So,
who are the two?
And so Helen Bruce, for example, and Dallas Alexander, I actually knew these. So Dallas Alexander, he was a sniper, but when I was in 1VP, he was a sniper in Patricia. And then when I was at JTF2, he was there. And so it's a very small community, and he's been on the Sean Ryan show. And Helen Bruce, I had been working with her since 2016 on these higher level contracts. And so it's such a small community that there's people I can't name, but covert law enforcement, people that were like 35 years, homicide detectives in Thunder Bay, you name it.
Higher level contracts as in executive protection.
No, these were the SRDTs, so the Standing Rapid Deployment Team courses. Like this was such a big, important piece. Like these are the people that go first, responding first to natural or man-made disasters or wars all over the world. Like they're first on the scene, and so it has to be done right. Anyway.
Okay, and
so we were leveraging people like her. So there was people in the special forces, former special forces that I had worked with, but she was so incredible at her job that she was utilized, or her experiences and her skill sets were utilized above and beyond her work as a hero as Ottawa Police Services and in SACA. This was beyond that. She was assisting with training people that were doing really important jobs overseas and at home.
How do you cross paths with Helen Bruce? She was not an RCMP detective. She was in Ottawa Police.
Ottawa Police Services, yes. And,
Ottawa Police Services, and she was investigating. She was tasked with child issues
for over 7 years. So she was part of the sexual assault child abuse unit in Ottawa, very close to where I was living at the time, where I since moved. And so, but since 2016, because of the community that I was working in, it's not just ex special forces or veterans. There's so many different backgrounds, like fire departments, firefighters, paramedics, business owners. There's just so many different levels of involvement that are required to get this training done in the most incredible way, whatever you want to call it. And so she was part of that, right? So there are people that are still serving military, for example, that were also part of assisting in these courses that I was teaching. So I was hiring facilitators. It's a very important piece. You need the incredible, like the best of the best to have these positions. And then I had what we would call role players, or people that were part of the practical portions of these courses. And again, it's all walks of life. It's all, so that's what I mean. I was working with so many different levels of law enforcement, like IRT and RCMP, OPP, OPS, like people all over Canada. And I've been all over Canada, and I was also part of networks beyond people working within government, but even in the Yukon, where we were sharing information. It was very much information, just trying to help and get the information out there.
Okay, so I guess the questions, the insider information that you get, or the unique information you get, is as a result of rubbing elbows with people within these various government agencies. I mean,
better said than I did.
Well, and now, because I want, people are going to ask how you know what you know, or how you know what you claim. And so in respect of COVID, there's a military games, which I don't think, or not military training, military games in Wuhan. I don't think many people knew about that, from which allegedly pretty much everybody gets sick. This is in October, before the March of 2020. What's up with those two Chinese scientists? What on earth are they doing in Canada? What research are they doing? And how do they up and leave and go and disappear in China?
I believe that gain of function has been done, and I would say it's unlawfully, but anyways, all over the world for many years. It's just not something that people were aware of. And so, for example, even in Ukraine, there were biolabs. And so this gain of function research, it's very dangerous. There's even gain of function research for bird flu, for example, in Athena, Georgia. And so, and so this is funded by the NIH and other organizations. And there's just so much to this. I don't know if they had like ill intent when this leak happened. I don't think there was ill intent possibly when they allowed the Wuhan games to just continue to carry on. And I will say I don't know how many people were sick, because again, we're trying to get access to information out. We're not getting the information, but I will say multiple different countries during that time, many people that were involved in those games have spoken out and said that they were sick, and they believe it possibly that it was COVID in hindsight. And so many different countries, people are saying this. And so I don't know why Canada is being so close hold with this. I think it needs further investigation. But even during 2020, I was looking at medical, scientific, and government data that was censored in Canada. And so we were not aspirating needles. The PCR testing was ineffective, in my humble opinion, and how it was cycled as well. And you couldn't tell the difference between the flu or COVID. I had the vaccine adverse events reports from even as early as February of 2021, and I was sharing that. And I was sharing that people were contracting COVID via inoculation even at that time, and there were fatalities. There were so many other adverse events, but this was significant. Then I was getting within the network that there were possible links to children under the age of 5 dying, possibly connected to this therapeutic. And so there was just a lot of information that was getting fed. Also during it, so I could talk about that as well. In Public Health Ontario, they've archived their data now since March 2023, but they, even in their reports that they were giving as direction for the statistics, it's even in there. I can share this information, but it was 50% that they were increasing the death that had allegedly COVID. So they actually had it in these stats where they had reported cases of deaths that they were saying were reported and official and confirmed. And at the top, it says 50% increase in reporting of deaths. And the infection rates, depending on the age group, was incredibly significant. So they were inflating the infection rates. So you had the actual reported cases for deaths. It was already increased by 50%, which I thought was a crime in my humble opinion. Anyways, that's being dramatic, sorry. But the infection rates as well, like by age group, the reported versus what they were predicting was ridiculous. For the younger age groups, it was they were inflating it by over 300%. And if you get into the older age groups, it was upwards of over 600%. And so that to me was questionable. There's so much I can talk about in that. So I was getting medical, government, and scientific data. And I was also, again, people were giving me reports on the ground, people that were doctors, people that were nurses, people that were first responder types. And they were saying things, the whistleblower types, they were saying things that was not at all in line with the narrative. And we tried really hard to get the information out there. And we were charged, suspended, vilified, ostracized, called seditionists, etc. And even the Freedom Convoy, this was another staged and planned event, unfortunately, that involved the highest levels of government. Just like the January 6th Capitol riots, this was staged and planned. I was calling out Ray-Epps. I was calling out the pipe bombs being deliberately planted, and crisis actors being involved. And anyways, and so
the trucker protest, when you say it's a planned event, in which sense? Because there's many ways that it could be the event itself, a fake grassroots organized so that they can use it for whatever the purpose to demonize Canadians. What do you mean by that?
No, I'm going to say not the actual. It's so hard to explain because again, there were grassroots movements, absolutely, and people when people started paying attention to the Freedom Convoy, people started getting more hope, right? And so people were finally believing in that we were going to have a voice or a platform or an opportunity to get medical, scientific, and government data out there that people were just absolutely not getting. And I also think people largely responsible for it was the mainstream media, which is very left-leaning at this time. It was very much propaganda the entire time. And so anyways, the grassroots movement. So there were people that kind of that are in these organizations or groups as plants or as people that are there for info gathering. Like you have honeypots, you also have covert operations. There's people in every single protest group that you want to think about, left and right. There are people there and they're there. Anyways. And so there were people like that there, but there were also people that were incentivized or given the incentive to kind of use this as an opportunity to exploit, just like the January 6th, just like the staged and planned coup that happened in Ukraine in 2014, etc. And so, so there are people, again, like Nancy Pelosi types in Canada that do kind of set the stage for it, but I don't think that they understood that there were so many Canadians that were losing hope, that realized that when the Freedom Convoy started getting attention, that it got into way bigger of a thing than they thought it was going to be, like for a fact. And so there were so many moving parts. And so there was even people that were veterans that had speaking, I guess they were speaking during the Freedom Convoy, and I was like helping them with like their speeches. And there was people that were law enforcement types, and we were really trying to make this peaceful. But even Helen, like she was suspended and charged on the 29th of January, like just that first weekend of the Freedom Convoy. And so even a week before it was coming, long story longer, I already knew that it was going to come to Ottawa. And I was reaching out to all my contacts just to warn them in advance so that this wasn't something that there was a surprise element to it, because that's also what happened with January 6th. Like not a lot of people were tracking that this was going to happen and be that big, right? And so anyways, there was that aspect to it. Yeah, so I'd say that the government, that's well put. Sorry, my partner's here. So the government hijacked the convoy to support its right-wing extremist narrative is exactly what they did. That's well said. And just like they did January 6th.
Well, not that I want.
And there were so many lies that were spread. So Marco Menachino and David Lametti, they were again like laughing about employing tanks on innocent civilians in the crowds. There was I might know who the person was that had that
Nazi flag or the swastika,
yeah. And so even Brendan Miller during the Emergency Act hearings, like he tried to get that information out of Marco Menachino, but he didn't want to answer it. And so there were known instigators that were in the same communities as Marco Menachino and Bill Blair and others that again were trying to elicit emotional responses in people in order to make this into some kind of a riot or cause actual harm or division. And so they were lying in the House of Commons about arson. They were blaming it on the Freedom Convoy protesters. Again, they painted into something that it was not, and they exploited the homeless people within the area. And I was doing volunteer work with the Ottawa Mission for many years. And so I was talking to the director at the time because I was also a facilitator anyway. And so we knew what was up, and I was letting him know as well that this is something that would be exploited by extreme radicals within anyways.
It will extreme radical government moles to try to turn it into something that as far as I'm concerned, ultimately never turned into.
Exactly.
But the swastika flag, the Nazi flag, whatever the motivation was behind that, the alleged arson, the alleged stealing of food from the homeless shelter, all government-fed narratives that the CBC gleefully reproduced.
Exactly. It was so shameful.
Well, and Helen Gruss, for those who don't know, she was the on Ottawa Police Service. She was one looking into child abuse. What is it called? SASM? Child?
She was part of SACA. So she was part
SACA.
of the sexual assault child abuse unit. And so she she was very familiar with the trends and the stats regarding sudden infant deaths and other trends and things like that. So these were of consideration, or sorry, of importance to look at, and it was not being done. And instead, she just got friggin' charged. Sorry for swearing, but discreditable conduct just recently, and she's going to appeal it, and rightfully so, because she is absolutely someone that was doing her job, in my humble opinion. She was providing medical, scientific, and government data, like I keep saying, from even people like Byron Bridle, who had a very large, detailed analysis of so many different things that people need to look at. And
Helen Gruss, she was noticing a trend of fatalities among infants, toddlers, and then she went and asked the parents about their vaccination status to look into why these children were dying in larger numbers than her experience said was normal. And then she got sanctioned for allegedly, inquiring as to the vaccination status of the mothers of the kids of these young infants that she was seeing dying at abnormal rates, according to her, sanctioned for dishonorable conduct. And then she had her hearing recently, and they found her, I don't know if it was liable or guilty, because I don't think it was a criminal case. It was disciplinary. They found internal. And they found that she acted dishonorably and that her firing was legitimate. And I guess she's going to appeal it. But so you said that she was disciplined or sanctioned the January 29th, which was like the day the convoy started. I didn't piece those two timelines together at the time, but
she was suspended and charged on the 29th of January of 2022. And so like that made it where she would be incapable of trying to, like, in my humble opinion, make it as peaceful as possible, because the people within my community that I was talking to that also worked with her, I can't name them, but they were boots on the ground. And so anyone that was like saying that we need to question the vaccines, that we need to question the lockdowns and mandates, people that literally are first responder types, people on the freaking ground, these people were completely ostracized, segregated, isolated, suspended, charged, like all of these things. So they were not able to impact as best as they could the protests and things like that, and manage that peace in a peaceful way. That's why I don't necessarily believe that they wanted this to be peaceful. I think that there are people within the House of Commons and cabinet, whatever you want to call it, that were absolutely trying to make this a more dangerous event than it was. And I'm very proud of it. There's so many different people that were working to make, and so many different, I would say, like, organizations, like so many veterans came out, and again, they were giving coffee, they were giving blankets, they were cleaning up streets, the truckers as well. Like these were heroes. And even my stepfather, he's been a trucker for like over 40 years now. And so they,
yes. It looks like she was suspended with pay on February 4, 2022. The protest started just shortly before, but that was right in the thick of it. And so I don't know what the terms of her suspended with pay were at the time. And then she had her hearing which only recently came down with
so I don't know what is being reported. Again, this is like I was told by people that work like very closely with. I mean, I talked to her still. I wouldn't mind having her on when she's able to speak freely about what happened and what's going on. But I'll absolutely I can line that up because anyway. And so where was it going with that? Yeah, and so that first weekend she was and so even before that we like she was sharing fact-based information like well before the Freedom Convoy. And so even at the end of November of 2021, these therapeutics, they were approved for children up to the age of from five and over, right? And so it was approved for the 5 to 11 demographic, and we're like, oh my God, they're still approving this, even though it's not even anyway. And so that was
Kathy Hochul still pushing it out of New York. Last I checked, within the last year, pushing it on 6 months and over, and that woman should be locked up for the rest of her life. So you're involved in all of this at the time. I'm just curious as to how you ever, and not to jinx anything, and not to like, there's no fear hiding a wish. This is just a fear. How do you not get entirely blacklisted from everyone and everything intelligence related in the Canadian government? Am I optimistic in thinking that there's a lot of people who wish to remain unnamed within Canadian intelligence that are supportive of what you're doing?
Yes, I'm getting a lot of information as well I can't even name these people, but all levels of government. These are hero people that are risking giving me information, and they're doing it because they care about Canada. They see the direction it's going, and they're aware of a lot of things that are going on, including 9/11, that a lot of people think that they don't know about. And they were, and so they're giving this information at risk to themselves, and they're incredible people, and I really appreciate it. And we're still trying and fighting. Obviously, it's about truth and peace, but being informed. And there's so much I could have talked about regarding Canadian political parties and versus the Americans, and where I could see it can impact change. But
well, let's start with let's start with the basic stuff here, at least COVID related, because
right.
Chinese infiltration in the government. I've been like, I don't care if someone. My only issue is I don't know how you verify this information. If someone were to come to me and say, Viva, I don't want to be named, but these are the names of the MPs who are compromised knowingly or unknowingly. Do you? We went through yet another election in Canada where we know that there are MPs, currently sitting MPs, whose names have not been disclosed, who are compromised,
yes,
unwittingly or wittingly. Do you know who they are?
We so through Ethos and Arrows, we've also we have repeatedly submitted access to information requests for those names, and they refuse to give it. And so that's still ongoing. I can make assessments, and so like for example, again, I'm not saying he's on the list at all, but Bill Blair, for example, I had questions and concerns about him, regardless of his affiliations with China, because when he was the chief of police in 2010 during the G20 summits, during that time, there's still no accountability for things that happened there, including using crisis actors and staged and planned events during that protest period, and heavy overreach that he was not held accountable for. So during the Freedom Convoy period, when he was when he was in cabinet, like it was terrifying. It was like very, not terrifying, but it was concerning that like just you already know that the extent that he would go even in 2010 to, you would know what the extent that he was willing to go, I would say, and would he push that even further during the Freedom Convoy? So it was a very interesting time. There were so many different moving parts and people I was communicating with, and they were all just trying to help.
So Chinese infiltration, we will not get the names of the MPs unless somebody. I don't even know how I would verify that the information is true, even if someone sent it to me via DM. That's one thing.
So how I would approach it is, and it's not to target people, obviously, I think this needs to be peaceful. People need to be held accountable. I think there's a way to do it, but I digress. And so there's people that have, I would say, if they're communicating with people within China, like within like multiple different levels of government, like I would say that like even in Canada, like even if you realize it or not, like you're giving information that is easily accessible, right? So even with a cell phone, right? Like even if when you have it shut off, especially an iPhone, people can still access that phone and hear conversations and listen in, like recording devices, etc. So it's very easy, even on a laptop or through emails, to get access to information because.
There's a report like CSIS, the Canadian Security. I just want to make sure I got the acronym right. Canadian Security Intelligence Service. There's a report. There's a final report, an internal report that names the names, and it says these are the people. Pierre Poilievre didn't have access to it, I presume. Well, I know because he didn't want to get gagged. To gag someone with information, to disclose information of national security. There's a CSIS report. Nobody leaks that. Like nobody. I don't know.
Well, I'll re-engage.
Leaves the computer on.
I'll re-engage Ethos and Arrows because he's put in a lot of access to information requests in, and so I can re-engage the last we asked. It wasn't submitted. But speaking of CSIS, so even during that time as well, like I've provided information regarding the Freedom Convoy period, which they were trying to justify in the Emergency Act being employed, which I thought was unconstitutional even at the time. And I was anyway, and train of thought gone.
CSIS.
Thank you. And so they were getting their information and trying to paint, again, this right-wing extremist narrative, which was really frustrating because they were getting their information from people like Justin Ling, respectfully speaking, but he was very radical left-wing, part of Vice News, worked with CBC, like leftist media. And there was no facts or information. And so I was just very surprised that CSIS was getting their information to justify, all these measures by using, like a reporter, and I mean,
a state-funded reporter. It's the disinformation.
And a state-funded reporter.
No, it's the Steele dossier over, all over again. They get their lackeys within the media to produce something that they can then rely on.
Yeah, exactly.
So okay, so we won't know who the names of the tainted
No,
MPs
actually, no,
are.
Aviva. Unfortunately, I would love to give you that information because I have tried to get it, and so I'm going to re-engage. And so, like, if and when I do get this information, I will. I will
I'll
give it
take
to you
it.
first. I will absolutely.
No, but I may have to make sure that I'm comfortable in terms of how I can verify the accuracy of the information. But set that aside now. The Chinese infiltration in terms of influencing MPs. Justin Trudeau and their government. When do you first become aware of Mark Carney?
Well, I was like, I would say condemning him on social media platforms as early as 2021. When he was talking about the net zero carbon scam tax stuff. I said, like, I'd prefer you be in jail, to be honest. Again, this is just at that time, I was already like, I already understood that, like, the policies and the measures and his deep banking connections would ultimately not lead us in a good direction. And at that time, even in 2020, like, he was the financial advisor to the Liberal government, and so he was the one that was recommending, or at least involved in the implementing just destroying the economy, printing of the money, selling our gold reserves, and freezing bank accounts. Again, he was calling us seditionists. Anyway, so extreme measures that were used, and then again, just completely mismanaging the economy and his not deep, but he's Chrystia Freeland's, as everyone knows, son's godfather. And
that just slipped out during not even during the debates. I don't know where Chrystia Freeland said it. There's almost how do you get the gig? Like, so you're not blacklisted, which means that there's some element of support within Canadian intelligence. I had on
intelligence, and that's almost an oxymoron at this point in time. No offense to anyways, but it's like the people that I'm working with are people that are more like at the high up, but like on the ground, like the people that are seeing things, experiencing things with a unbiased lens or view. Like I believe that our House of Commons and cabinet also, I believe that these have been positions that people are just cycling through, and they're pushing the same narrative, the same agendas, and it's and getting a lot of money to do it, and because we're not scrutinizing people or holding them accountable, and these are people that are elect anyways, and they're selected from so for example, with Carney, he's going to be announcing his new cabinet ministers next week or in the next couple of weeks, and so out of these people, like there have been people that have been reelected in their districts, whatever you want to call it, like Bill Blair and Melanie Joly and Anita, and like all these people are reelected, and so he could possibly go from that pool and elect people, or so not elect people, but nominate people,
appoint to his cabinet,
appoint to his cabinet. That there's been no accountability. And if you look at the U.S., when Pete Hegseth and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, they all had to go. They were nominated by Donald J. Trump, obviously, but they had to get grilled by Senate people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Everyone saw that, and they were grilled hard. And we do not have that in Canada at all. It needs to happen because these people, again, they're getting elected because of a lot of misinformation spread by leftist mainstream media, like Rosemary Barton. She is absolutely a propagandist. David Cochrane as well, and others. And it's not helping, right? And they get paid so much money and their bonuses. It's just they're always going to reinforce that narrative that these specific people are pushing. And so until it's scrutinized and people are held accountable, because I would have a lot of questions to ask. For example, if I was part of a committee like the senators in the U.S., like I would be asking a lot of questions to Marco Menachino, and well, he's not in anymore, but like Bill Blair, Chrystia Freeland, and these people that absolutely destroyed I wouldn't say absolutely destroyed, but they've definitely hollowed out the middle class and impacted us.
They've devastated Canada. But I was going to ask you a question. Hold on. It had to do with, yes, well, it was related to China, but you're in law enforcement, and the fentanyl crisis in Canada has made the headlines now because it was used as, call it a pretext. It was invoked by Trump for the tariff war. I had on Sam Cooper. You're familiar with Sam Cooper?
I am now in the last few months. He is great.
Yeah,
So
but no, he's in the thick of the weeds. And you know, what is your knowledge experience of what's going on in terms of the fentanyl crisis in Canada, the manufacturing, the importation of what do they call the precursors to make the drug in Canada, the super labs, how much of it's getting effectively, how much of it is in fact crossing the border into the States via the northern border? Like, what's your knowledge of the fentanyl crisis in Canada?
I'm not as familiar with it as I would say he is, but I can definitely speak on it. I know that there's absolutely a fentanyl crisis in Canada that's going on, and in the U.S. and this is impacting like a lot of people within BC, but also in some areas like even in the Yukon. I think there are people that are impacted by this, and there are I share a lot about this fentanyl crisis and how it's impacting us, and these safe supply areas, how it's completely just like it's just not a good idea. And I have so many reasons why, but I won't get too deep into that. But yeah, it is a crisis. It's at crisis levels, and I think that this is something that needs to be absolutely controlled better. I have recommendations, but again, that's a long conversation for another time possibly. And it is going across the borders, and our borders have not been secure. And so I've been saying that for several years. I've tracked people able to gain entry into Canada from obviously the US, and very easily, and even showing me videos like proving that they were able to do it. And so it's very, so I would say that it would be really hard to get like really accurate stats on that. Like I do have another contact. He is the emergency management disaster assistance manager, again, like for the entire province of Alberta. Like he's really high up there, and he's a former Patricia. But I can ask him questions about this. There's people I can ask, but I've been so focused on, there's so many other things that I've like done research on.
No, for sure.
I have to go back.
These are the ones that have been in the news, you know, recently, but and not just because they're in the news. It's just like these are the problems of Canada. Within the intelligence community, you know, the immigration in Canada. And now you have Mark Carney now finally saying we're going to keep temporary residents, or I don't know if he said student visas or temporary residents, to less than 5% of the population because immigration has become unsustainable. With the immigration that's going on in Canada, it looks like it's a deliberate plan to destroy Canada. You're on the ground. I don't know if you're near the parts of Ontario where it seems that neither English nor French is one of the official languages. What do you know of the immigration crisis in Canada? Basically the open borders and the outright, if it's not replacement, it's dilution of the population via immigration. What are your thoughts, and what knowledge do you have on that?
There's so much I can speak to on that as well. I would say, oh my God, it's hard to unpack. So I would say that especially in the last, it was definitely more notable in the last 5 years. But even with immigration, just at the levels that it was at, even when I was in the military, we were having planning conferences, and people from their respective organizations were saying that was already a problem, that we were not able to properly manage or control people that were coming here on very specific visas, or international students, temporary foreign workers, or people here for valid work reasons or travel. Very hard to control even at that time, and it got immensely worse after 2015, but especially during COVID. And so I do believe that whether people were doing this deliberately or not, it just was there was just there was just too much, and especially for such a small population. And all of these, there were so many different areas within the suburbs that were completely destroyed, protected areas like heritage sites and churches and national parks and things like that were, anyways, areas that were completely shredded for new builds. And so there was a lot of new builds that were happening, and it could have been strategically placed, I don't know, but it was in areas where there would be more of a, I would say, like a liberal demographic, because a lot of immigrants, they do vote liberal, and at least that's been the trend. And for various different reasons, whether they believe that these are the parties that are going to provide more assistance and support, etc. Or because, again, just like the messaging and the propaganda, because there's a lot of people within the liberal cabinet, or not cabinet, but the liberal party, whatever you want to call it, that even greet these like immigrants when they come. So right as soon as they get here, there's the liberal signs, there's like their shaking hands, and then they don't have that same representation from the conservatives or the other parties. And so I would say that might impact things as well. And so it has been unsustainable. And I would say that because of that, we're getting a lot more liberal voters, but it's people that are coming here, and it's just the way it is. And it's been impacting. There's been an increase in crime. There's been an increase in. There's so many issues with this, especially with Quebec, because I am French and English Canadian, I would say, but I was born and raised in Quebec, and I do believe that we should, maintain that French culture in Quebec, and they're even saying now, they're admitting that it's just unfortunately unsustainable because it was just too much at once, and it wasn't giving the respect to the people coming here, or the people that are here. Like it was just done, I guess, as some kind of a, I don't know, like a factory. I'm rambling, but
this is first of all, also you're friends with law enforcement, or you're still involved in that intimately. How bad is the uptick or crime itself in Canada right now? Like everyone always says, well, it's not as bad as America. I'm not sure about that. It's
in Brampton and other areas where actually where our crime rates are getting higher than even like the highest areas in the US. And these are it's not just gang related. So that there's we're dealing with I would say unlawful gun ownership, and these are illegal firearms that are coming in through the US. But again, these are people that are it's illegal. Anyway, there's just so many different levels to this, but definitely an increase in crime of all capacities, and it's getting a lot more organized, a lot more B&Es as well, break and enterings, and it's much more violent. And there's been more stabbings, there's been more shootings, there's been even where I had to move from where I was in Stittsville. It was like relatively rural, and then there was incidents where I just didn't feel safe in my own home, and so I ended up moving, and I'm in a cabin in the woods. Well, it's a home, it's a log home. It's nice, but I'm like away from that now, and because I was already feeling like the impact and the increase in mortgage rates, and the carbon tax scam, which is stealing money from us, and it's ridiculous. And people are not held accountable. So Stephen Guilbeault, like, he just got promoted, so people are getting promoted for their ineffectiveness, and Doug Ford too. Like, I could go on tangents about him even in 2021. Like, people are blaming Pierre for a lot of things that have happened within the Conservative Party that are that people have questions about, and people don't forget that Doug Ford, he profited from, like, his decal business profited during COVID, and so there was absolutely an agenda there, or at least a bias, and the lockdowns and restrictions and that he imposed on us, it was quite extreme, not as bad as Quebec, but fairly close, and so people were upset about that, right? And so I think that Pierre's been getting a lot of heat, and rightfully so, for myself as well. I've shared like my concerns with some things that he has said, or what his platform supports that I don't. But I still think he's a superior option to Mark Carney, and I just can't believe that people didn't see that in Canada.
It's that's the problem with the captured media, that it literally controls people's minds and thoughts and behavior. One interesting one, and this came up when I was Googling, when I was grokking your name. I don't know why my dog is barking. He doesn't actually bark all that often. The question was this. Okay, so the 2 missing children in Nova Scotia. And I put out a tweet now that has gone quasi viral as far as Twitter is concerned, of the police chief starting off the press conference update on the 2 missing children with a land recognition, and then thanking African Nova Scotians for their enrichment over the last 400 years of, I don't know what the name of the native name of Nova Scotia is. I have a friend up in Nova Scotia who says, Viva, like, this area is a notoriously crimey area. The human trafficking in Nova Scotia is notoriously high, and I didn't yet dive fully into that rabbit hole. I don't know if you know anything about this. He said it also sort of relates to the Warman, the guy who went on the mass shooting spree in.
I was going to say that, yeah, it's
Nova Scotia
area.
So, like, can you explain this? Because Nova Scotia leads Canada and like quadruples the national human trafficking rate, which I didn't know. And I don't know what the tie-in with Warman is, the guy who's Canada's worst mass shooting that spanned over a day, and using an RCMP cruiser. People still don't know if it was a real cruiser or not. They don't know where he got $500,000 from a private banking, and people suspect he might have been either an informant or related to RCMP. Do you have any knowledge of this to steer me in the further rabbit hole digging direction that I'm going to carry on after this interview?
I can impact. So what possibly happened with this guy would be the same thing I would say that happened with Ryan Ruth and Matthew Thomas Cooks and others, like people that get radicalized and incentivized and sometimes given money and cell phones and stuff like that to commit, crimes. And so there's the possibility of that. The with regards to acknowledging the land rights, I apologize if I'm explaining that. I would say that there's so many things I can, but I won't. But again, it's
crazy. It's become government instruction, like basically direction to do it.
It is, and it takes away from actually what's going on, right? It just completely misses the mark. I thought it was very disrespectful, and a lot of people that I know within these communities also find this to be absurd at the lowest level. And so, but unfortunately, people that are in specific positions, and I don't mean to single anyone out, but the current chief of defense staff, like this, there's very much like a woke DEI a narrative that's being perpetuated and has been for over a decade under this specific CDS. And so that definitely doesn't help. And there are people that have told me, even in the last couple of months, that she has said that DEI is here to stay in response to people's questions about Trump and what Pete Hegseth are doing in the US. And that's what people want, like that I know personally, like amazing, incredible people that are putting their careers, and at risk. But anyways, they're sharing this information and people that don't deserve the positions that they have, but because they're pushing propaganda, they get these jobs undeservedly. And there's so many women I know that could have taken that job, and like when I was going through RMC, like there was Major Riefenstein. She was so incredible. And so anyway, so she could have been the DEI hire they wanted, if they wanted an actual good role model. Anyways, I'm rambling again. But
human trafficking in Nova Scotia.
Well, there's human trafficking stats that are also out for Ontario and all the provinces. And the last I checked, there's like human trafficking confirmed. Even the stats from 2023 and 2024, it's broken down by like they're called fast facts, but it gives, again, like it's underreported, unfortunately. But there's human trafficking for children and adults, and it's largely predominantly female. In Ontario and Quebec as well, and I could share those studies with you, or those reports if you want. And so it is happening, and I do think that things like Airbnbs are involved in these, and it's coordinated. Just there's so much I can unpack with that as well, with human trafficking and what to look for.
Well, but why is Nova Scotia disproportionately? Why are there disproportionate levels of human trafficking in Nova Scotia in particular? Is it a demographic issue? Is it a poverty issue, or is it a proximity to the ocean issue? If you know,
I would only be able to give like an analysis or a guess at this point. Like I can't really because I'm not as familiar with the cases in Nova Scotia as much as I am for example, like Ontario.
Well, so like, is it an increased trend that correlates to immigration?
Well, it seems to be that way, because like the human trafficking piece that was being reported before, like I don't want to go, I would say like 10 years prior to now, it was lower. And so we're looking at so many different trends of crimes being committed in Canada that we've never seen before, especially at this level. And I said, especially since COVID, these all accelerated. So we have to look at how, and in so many different aspects, like how and why this happened. And yeah.
Well, and now what are you working on these days? Are you still doing executive level stuff? You still have your clearance. You haven't gotten into that level of trouble with the Canadian government. What are you working on these days? And what is your assessment of the future of Canada?
Oh, these days I'm open. I would love to get back into, I would say like more, I would say like I'm a top secret security analyst, and so I'm always open to doing contracts or jobs depending what it is, obviously, to kind of help or get the truth out there. So I've been doing a lot of meetings, and a lot of the stuff I've been doing in the last 2 years has been pro bono, and it's because again, I moved I'm in a log cabin in the woods, and so there's so much to do here. So I've had to focus on gardening and animals and renovations and repairs and all that stuff. And I needed a little bit of a break too, to just like process and unpack just everything that had happened, especially, from, my God, I would say 2016 until 2023, but especially COVID. This was a period too where there were elections, there was tampering in the elections and misinformation and information being censored that impacted elections, I believe, and Afghanistan pullout and Russia-Ukraine war, all things I was saying in advance was going to happen. And so could possibly lead to some credibility on my assessments. But what I'm working on now is I'm trying to get the information out. So I am on Rumble and YouTube and on X. And so I do that. And anyways, yeah. What was the next question?
I know. Well, the next question is, does Canada fragment, break up over the next 4 to 10 years? Does it get taken over indirectly by foreign interests, that which might include the US? And are you hopeful for the future of Canada?
That's a hard question. I would say that we're definitely. I have concerns, obvious concerns with our current prime minister and his connections to Goldman Sachs and Bilderberg, and like a super nationalist with deep ties to people that are the Bilderberg types, the steering committees that care more about their shareholders and the people within their groups. And I think there's been little regard for the social impact of the policies and the procedures and these wars that they push on us. And admittedly so, they have said that they're beholden to the shareholders. And there's actually, was it Ford and Dodge, or anyways, one of these vehicle companies got sued because they were not making their shareholders money. And so that was like that generations ago too, that was happening. And so there's actually legal ramifications too when you don't make a profit. So there's incentive there as well. And again, there's no view, I think, of societal impact. And so he's been hollowing out the middle class and key industry within Canada directly and indirectly for years. Like even moving Brookfield to the US, that was just one part of like so many other concerns that people should have regarding management. The net zero, the carbon tax scams, this climate change scam, the misinformation that's being spread. I have concerns with that. His involvement with WEF, like I've said as well, concerns. And I think, yeah, there's just so many different like cons that I have with him. And I think Danielle Smith, I think she's incredible. And I think that she is someone that could possibly hold him to account, and Pierre Poilievre as well, once he gets hopefully reelected, so that he can go in the House of Commons and actually, anyway, do the business. And so I think that we have good people in key positions that are trying really hard to get Canada on track, but there's so much resistance because of, for example, left-wing radicalized mainstream media that's state funded, and so it's a way to we have to manage that piece first. They have to get defunded, or I just don't see, and I think Trump just did that as well. He just had it where PBS and other social media, news outlets, they are not getting government funding anymore, and so we should do that.
We'll see. Well, unfortunately, the man who got popular off of that, but then didn't run on that, didn't get elected, and the guy who promised to double their budget just got elected. So we'll see.
And I think they've known each other for longer than people think. I think that they've been in the same networks possibly for decades, and so there might be a closer relationship than people are being led to believe.
The they being
Donald Trump and Mark Carney.
Oh, Donald Trump. Yeah, I mean, I've heard that theory as well in terms of investments in hotels in, I forget what country, Dubai, maybe I want to say. I saw an analysis of that.
Well, I think you're referring to Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. He had bought that 666, anyways, a building in New York or something.
Who the hell makes an address 666?
I know, it's just, see, that's what I mean. Like that in and itself, like we can unpack how there needs to be some kind of religious philosophical framework or foundation that's tied to the current legal framework. But I won't. But yeah, so Jared Kushner, he was bailed out. It was through Qatar, but it was Brookfield indirectly through Qatar that bailed out. It was a lot of money.
Oh yeah, well, we're gonna. I mean, I think Carney's got 20 some odd days now to disclose his holdings and his interest in Brookfield. So we'll see if and when that happens and what's been what's been cleaned up in the 60 some odd days he had to disclose it. Dawn, so what is it? What is your Rumble channel?
My Rumble channel is Dawn 189.
Dawn, DAWN without an E, Dawn 189. What does the 189 mean?
It was just the last 3 of my service number.
Okay. And you're on Rumble, you're on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
It is Dawn Dussault. So it's my name. So DAWN, last name Dussault, DUSSAULT. Oh, yeah, it's like right there. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and also, well, some people are going to be listening on podcast.
Oh, yeah,
DUSSAULT. It's a French last name. Amazing. Dawn, we'll do a follow-up because we'll see where certain things go. Helen Grew's appeal, Carney's disclosures, and the fentanyl crisis and the tariffs. We'll see if and when the tariffs are lifted on Canada. As at the time of shooting this, Trump just struck a deal, or at least announced a deal with the UK. So they're all hunky-dory now, and Carney is getting the slapping that an ex parte slapping by virtue of this agreement, when Trump basically said nothing we can do for Canada just yet, but we'll see what happens later. Dawn, thank you very much. This was fantastic. You stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes, and everyone else out there, Godspeed. God bless. See you soon, peeps. Booyah.